Cathedral of the convicted, the prisoner who ran his crime empire from his cell, the kingdom behind the walls. If you think you've seen power, wait until you meet the man who built an empire from a concrete box. Subscribe before the system shuts this story down. It began in the shadow of Chicago's South Side, where streets ran red with ambition and fear. The 1970s had carved out a generation of hustlers, soldiers, and survivors, but only one name ruled the hierarchy like a ghost behind every corner: Larry Hoover. Before prison, he was already a legend, the founder of the Gangster Disciples, a street organization that started small but grew with military precision. The neighborhood saw him as more than a criminal, some whispered his name with reverence. He brought order to chaos, rules to the lawless. But his empire's rise came at a cost: blood, loyalty, and fear intertwined into one dark legacy. In 1973, Hoover's world shifted. A hit gone wrong, a dealer accused of stealing, ended with gunfire. The man was dead, and Hoover was charged with murder. The verdict was swift: life in prison. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, sealing his fate inside the gray steel walls of Illinois' Stateville Correctional Center. Most men die in spirit when they enter that place. But Hoover didn't break. He adapted. Inside, the rhythm of prison life was mechanical: the clang of doors, the shuffle of chains, the whispers in the yard. But behind those sounds, something else was happening. Letters moved. Codes shifted. Orders were given. The empire hadn't fallen. It had relocated. Stateville wasn't a cage, it was a command center. Hoover understood the system better than the system understood itself. He used respect and intellect as weapons. The guards thought they were watching him, but he was watching them. The prisoners followed his words like scripture. His network extended from cell to street, from Chicago to other states. By the early 1980s, the Gangster Disciples had become more than a gang, it was a corporation of control. They handled drugs, protection, and politics. And all of it was being directed by a man serving a life sentence. They called him the chairman. Prison visitors weren't just family, they were messengers. Lawyers weren't just defense attorneys, they were couriers. Every coded message carried his will outward. The streets spoke in whispers: Larry's still running it. But then came the twist: he wanted legitimacy. Hoover began preaching growth and development. He claimed the Gangster Disciples were transforming into a community organization. He spoke about education, business, and reform. To some, it was a brilliant reinvention, to others, a cover. Reporters came. Cameras rolled. Politicians hesitated. Was the man in the cell truly reformed, or had he just found a new mask for the same machine? The federal government wasn't buying it. By the early 1990s, the FBI's Operation Headache was quietly building a case. They monitored phone calls, tapped conversations, and sent informants into the prison's visitor logs. What they uncovered was staggering: Hoover wasn't rehabilitated. He was orchestrating drug routes, money laundering, and command structures from behind bars. The files showed he had communication lines stretching across multiple states, each contact disguised through coded legal documents, phone relays, and community centers. The numbers didn't lie: millions were moving. But the agents faced an impossible question: how do you take down a man who's already imprisoned? It wasn't enough to keep him locked up, his power wasn't physical anymore. It was psychological, systemic. Killing the body wouldn't kill the control. Inside Stateville, tension thickened. Whispers spread that someone was talking. One inmate disappeared from the yard. Another was found in solitary, unrecognizable. The air was electric with fear. The guards felt it too. By 1995, the federal task force had gathered enough evidence to strike. They planned a simultaneous operation that would raid both the streets and the prison itself, to dismantle the empire completely. But as they prepared the sting, one agent uncovered something that changed everything: a message smuggled out of Stateville written in perfect cursive on legal paper. It read, "You can take me out of the streets, but you'll never take the streets out of me." And below it, signed not as Larry Hoover, but simply, Chairman. When investigators traced the note's courier, what they found behind the prison walls revealed that Hoover's reach wasn't just extended, it was embedded. Because inside those cells, the guards weren't all guards. Some were believers. Some were paid. And some were protecting the empire itself. The FBI's operation was compromised before it even began. And as dawn broke over Stateville the morning of the raid, one of the lead agents realized something chilling. The man they were coming to expose already knew every move they'd make, the empire inside the cage. The morning of the raid began with silence, the kind of silence that makes even hardened agents hold their breath. Federal convoys rolled toward Illinois' Stateville Correctional Center under gray skies, engines humming low. The operation had one goal: dismantle Larry Hoover's criminal network once and for all. But deep inside the prison, Hoover already knew. While the task force whispered into radios and prepped their warrants, he sat calmly in his cell, hands folded over a stack of legal documents. To anyone else, it looked like routine paperwork. But inside those documents, between lines of legal jargon and coded phrases, was the entire blueprint of an underground empire. When the doors finally burst open, the sound echoed like thunder through the concrete hallways. Boots hit the floors, radios crackled, and officers shouted commands. Cells were opened, searched, and torn apart. But Hoover didn't flinch. He stood, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the lead agent through the bars. "Been expecting you," he said softly. For decades, investigators believed prison walls could isolate a man. What they hadn't accounted for was influence, invisible, intangible, and far more powerful than chains. Inside Stateville, Hoover wasn't a prisoner. He was a governor. Guards deferred to him. Inmates obeyed him. Even rival gangs operated under his peace treaties. He kept order, controlled violence, and distributed money. In a world built on chaos, he created balance, through fear, respect, and structure. The FBI soon learned that every move he made was calculated. Money orders disguised as legal fees, phone calls routed through paralegals, coded language buried inside church donations, it was all part of a massive laundering system. The deeper they dug, the more surreal it became. A single message from his cell could trigger street operations across multiple states. Orders for hits, product movement, or even political donations, all filtered through a network of loyal followers. One intercepted letter from Hoover read, "Our people are not soldiers anymore. We are executives. We build, not destroy." It sounded poetic, almost reformed. But the numbers told a darker truth: drug operations were still active, gang accounts were growing, and the executives he spoke of were managing distribution networks under the guise of community outreach. In the FBI's surveillance room, agents watched the evidence mount. "This isn't rehabilitation," one said quietly. "It's evolution." By 1995, the scope of Hoover's empire stunned even his enemies. He had turned incarceration into a strategy, turning the illusion of reform into the perfect smokescreen. When agents raided his associates' homes across Chicago, they uncovered coded ledgers marked only with symbols, circles, arrows, and letters that corresponded to prison block codes. Each symbol represented a territory, each letter a lieutenant. It was a criminal stock market operating in plain sight. But then came a discovery that made the entire case personal. During a sweep of Hoover's private visitation area, agents found a hidden notebook taped under a table. Written in neat, steady handwriting, it wasn't a confession, it was philosophy. Power is not what they let you have. It's what you build when they think they've taken it away. It was signed with the same word again, Chairman. The press exploded when news of the operation leaked. Overnight, Larry Hoover became more than a name, he became a symbol of defiance. To some on the outside, he was misunderstood, even heroic. People held rallies calling for his release, chanting, "Free Larry Hoover," believing he had truly transformed into a reformer. But behind the slogans and headlines, federal investigators knew the truth. They were tracing millions of dollars in drug revenue to accounts tied to Hoover's alleged community initiatives. Churches, youth centers, even political donations, all fed by the same veins of corruption. Still, something didn't add up. Despite the raids, the seizures, the arrests, operations on the streets barely slowed. Someone else was issuing commands. Someone was keeping the machine running. The FBI suspected there was a second layer, an internal council of lieutenants, each trained personally by Hoover years earlier, embedded across multiple prisons. It was an empire designed to survive even if the leader fell. When agents finally cracked one encrypted message, they realized just how deep the structure ran. It read, "If the chairman is silenced, the board still meets." Every member of that board was behind bars, serving time for unrelated crimes, spread across 5 states. And each one answered to Hoover. As agents pieced the puzzle together, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a criminal network. It was a government of its own, built inside America's prison system. Then came the breakthrough. A wiretap recorded a call between Hoover and one of his top men on the outside. The language was subtle, coded: projects, growth, meetings, but context revealed the truth. He wasn't running a reform group. He was directing a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise from a cell. On the night the FBI presented the evidence to the Department of Justice, one senior agent said, "He's more dangerous in here than he ever was out there." And they were right. 2 years later, in 1997, Hoover was indicted again, this time under the Continuing Criminal Enterprise Act. Federal prosecutors claimed he had turned his prison cell into the boardroom of an ongoing empire. When they came for him this time, it wasn't with local police or state troopers. It was the FBI, DEA, and U.S. Marshals, moving as one. They didn't just arrest Larry Hoover, they extracted him from Stateville and sent him to a place built for men like him, ADX Florence, Colorado, America's most secure supermax prison. As the transport convoy disappeared into the night, one federal agent whispered, "Now let's see if power can survive total isolation." But the answer would come soon, and it would leave investigators questioning whether the walls of even the most secure prison could contain a man who'd already turned confinement into command, the ghost in the system. ADX Florence, Colorado, the end of the line. They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a concrete fortress buried under silence. For most inmates, it's a tomb. No sound, no light, no connection to the outside world. But for Larry Hoover, it wasn't the end of control. It was an upgrade in discipline. When he arrived in 1997, he was placed in H-Unit, solitary confinement 23 hours a day. Meals through a slot. 1 hour of exercise inside a cage. No contact visits. No phone privileges. To the government, it was containment. To Hoover, it was evolution. From that cell, his legend only grew. The Gangster Disciples still whispered his name like scripture. His portrait appeared in murals. His initials were etched into walls across Chicago, Atlanta, and Memphis. The authorities had physically buried the man. But they hadn't buried the myth. Even inside Florence, Hoover carried an aura that reached beyond walls. Prison psychologists noticed it first, letters arriving from unknown senders, written with reverence. "We still follow you," one said. "You taught us structure." Another read, "Chairman, your word is our light." The irony wasn't lost on the FBI. They had tried to erase his influence. Instead, they'd turned him into a ghost, a symbol of resistance, invisible yet everywhere. Behind the scenes, the federal task force continued to monitor communication networks linked to the Gangster Disciples, known internally as the Growth and Development Movement. Hoover's ideology had been repackaged: less gang, more self-empowerment. But analysts noticed the same structure: ranks, codes, symbols, and hierarchies. It wasn't reformation. It was rebranding. Investigators uncovered encrypted emails, anonymous bank accounts, even nonprofit organizations that funneled funds into hidden accounts. Every time they traced a lead, it looped back into the same core phrase: the blueprint. That phrase appeared in speeches, pamphlets, and graffiti alike. No one could prove Hoover was behind it, but every law enforcement officer who dealt with him recognized the signature style. Inside his cell, Hoover refused interviews. He didn't shout, didn't rebel, didn't protest. He simply waited. When questioned, he told officials, "I've paid for my sins." I'm trying to rebuild minds. But the truth was, even silence can command. A Bureau of Prisons report in 2005 concluded, the inmate continues to exert influence through coded communications and third-party correspondence. Total isolation has not diminished his impact. One investigator described it best, he's not running a gang anymore. He's running an ideology. Years passed. Generations of the organization shifted. But the name Larry Hoover never vanished, it morphed. His followers turned him into a prophet of structure, discipline, and dominance. Some called him a misunderstood leader. Others knew better, they saw him as a strategist who weaponized reform. Then, in 2019, a new digital trail reignited the Hoover case. Encrypted group chats surfaced on the dark web, using Hoover's quotes as their foundation. One message stood out. When they lock the body, free the mind. When they silence the voice, teach the code. FBI analysts recognized it immediately, it was lifted word for word from Hoover's prison writings confiscated years earlier. The ghost was speaking again, through those who worshipped his philosophy. Meanwhile, in Chicago, agents noticed a disturbing trend. The younger generation of gang members no longer saw themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as disciples of order, quoting Hoover's ideals of growth and development, without even knowing the violence it had been built upon. The empire had gone digital. What Hoover once managed with handwritten notes and hidden visitors was now being maintained through encrypted servers, offshore accounts, and social media codes. And the most chilling part? None of it required his direct involvement anymore. He had become what the Bureau feared most, a symbol powerful enough to self-sustain. Inside ADX, Hoover remained mostly silent. At age 70, his eyes had grown tired, his beard white. Yet during one rare legal phone call, he told his attorney, "If I die in here, I'll still be out there." The call ended. But that line lingered, across headlines, across courts, across the internet. In 2021, activists renewed a campaign to release him, claiming he had been reformed. They cited his age, his years in isolation, and his message of peace. But federal prosecutors refused, citing ongoing security risks to the public. Behind closed doors, one senior FBI official admitted, "He doesn't need to be released to be dangerous." His words already escaped years ago. The system had trapped his body but not his reach. By 2023, the Bureau quietly labeled him a psychological case study in leadership persistence. Inmates still spoke of him like a living myth, some feared him, some worshipped him. And somewhere, behind the thick glass and concrete of ADX Florence, Larry Hoover sat in silence, a man whose mind outlasted the metal built to contain him. The prison had become his cathedral. The faithful, his congregation. Because when you build power not from presence but from belief, walls can't hold you. They thought they buried a criminal. But they created a legend. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe before the next empire rises from behind bars.